Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Well, Ottawa has announced new funding to expand electric vehicle chargers in BC. This is just ahead of 2026 when BC takes its first step toward making all new car sales zero emission. But are British Columbians still on board? A new poll finds waning support for those sales mandates. We're asking you, are you still interested in an electric vehicle? And what do you think of the sales mandates for zero-emission cars? At 12:40, what are your questions about immunizations as we start a new school year? I'm Michelle Elliott. Welcome to BC Today. Thanks for joining us on CBC Radio, CBC Television. We're live streaming as well on YouTube at CBC British Columbia. And thanks for joining us on TikTok. You can call us now on our top story. Are you still interested in an electric vehicle? What do you think of expanding charging infrastructure like we heard about today? And what about zero-emission vehicle sales mandates? Our number is 604-669-3733 or 1-800-825-5950. You can just hit pound 690 as well. Or email bctoday@cbc.ca. You can leave a comment on our TikTok Live too. Well, yes, today Ottawa announced $22.7 million to expand electric vehicle charging in BC. And that will lead to 480 EV chargers. These would be along main travel routes, in public places, at workplaces, and in multi-unit residential buildings. That may be good news for you if you drive an electric vehicle or are thinking of getting one. But sales are waning. And today, a new poll finds some 56% of British Columbians oppose the incoming zero-emission vehicle sales mandate. So here's how that mandate works. Starting next year, BC will ramp up the proportion of new car sales to zero emissions, so aiming for 100% by 2035. The poll was commissioned by the Energy Futures Institute, and we'll speak with them in a few minutes. But we're also asking you, are you still interested in electric vehicles? And what do you think of the incoming sales mandates? What about expanding EV infrastructure? What do you think of that? Give us a call now. Just hit pound 690 on your cell phone, or you can dial 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733. You can also email bctoday@cbc.ca or leave a comment on our TikTok Live. Joining me first is Evan Pivnick, Program Manager at Clean Energy Canada. Good afternoon, Evan.
Afternoon. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for joining us. A lot to parse through here, but first let's get your reaction to this announcement from the federal government. More than $22 million for expanding EV infrastructure. What difference do you think that will make?
I mean, expanding EV infrastructure is absolutely critical. We've consistently seen that the perception as well as the reality of infrastructure as a challenge for EV adoption is one of the top sort of 2 or 3 challenges that consistently gets named. BC is actually a leader across Canada when it comes to putting in place that infrastructure. So more public infrastructure is always welcome. There is a real need to start to shift that focus, though, to where most of the charging actually takes place, which is in the households. And in BC, that means apartment buildings, any of the sort of multi-unit places where most people end up living. That's really where the focus for new infrastructure needs to be to address that home charging barrier that we see.
Okay, and we see that as part of today's announcement. Has that come fast enough, do you think, given the challenge of climate change and given the fact that these mandates are starting next year? We're looking at 26% of light-duty vehicles mandated to be zero emission by next year. I mean, have they worked fast enough to address those, as you say, the perceptions or reality of lack of infrastructure?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, more infrastructure is just going to be welcome. It's going to help address folks that are thinking about leaving the Lower Mainland to go and visit family in the Okanagan. It helps ensure that if you're out and about and need that charge, you have access to that. In terms of fast enough, BC is one of the national leaders. We're a leader almost across North America for a long time. We saw 23% of sales last year be EVs. So in terms of speed, more infrastructure that is in sync with the targets we're setting and the deployment we're seeing is absolutely essential. I think it's really good news that we're continuing to see that investment from the federal government and the provincial government. There's a lot of signs that BC Hydro is putting a similar focus on making sure the infrastructure is in place and just removing that fundamentally as a barrier for households that want to look at an EV for their next vehicle.
Is the interest still there? You mentioned the sales last year. They have slowed from the peak in 2024. And we have this new poll that was commissioned by the Energy Futures Institute. It was conducted by Ipsos, suggesting more than half of British Columbians oppose that mandate that is starting next year, ramping up to full 100% by 2035. So what do you think of the support level in BC still?
Yeah, I mean, first, we're in a bit of a unique moment in time here. We've had a whole bunch of changes to different policies, both federally and provincially, looking at rebates. So both are paused.
Right.
The federal government's indicated it's coming back. Those things have an impact on the interest to purchase, people holding off to see if they can get a better deal in a few short months. So this really does feel like a bit of a storm we're trying to weather. In terms of the interest for EVs, we've actually got sort of major new polling that focused on BC that's going to be coming out next week as part of a pretty significant report that looks at interest for exactly these sorts of clean energy solutions. We found 53% of British Columbians actually are inclined to look at an EV as their next vehicle. That grows to 70% of households living in Metro Vancouver. That cuts across all demographics. It's 80% of those aged 18 to 29, 63% who are earning less than 50K, almost 2/3 of renters. So we actually see a lot of support for EVs and a lot of interest in it, in large part because people recognize that EVs can save them money. Our previous work has shown that for an average household, we're talking about $3,000 a year in savings by shifting to EVs and charging it using BC clean electricity. So the awareness of the cost savings and the interest, we don't see that same lagging. We see upfront cost barriers, of which an EV mandate is intended to help address.
Let's take some calls. Evan Pivnick is my guest. My apologies. He's program manager at Clean Energy Canada. We're asking you, are you still interested in an electric vehicle? What do you think of the incoming mandates here in BC? And what do you think of the expanded infrastructure that's just been announced? $22 million from Ottawa to build 480 EV chargers. Okay, our numbers are 604-669-3733. You can also just hit pound 690 on your cell phone. 1-800-825-5950 is another number. And you can email bctoday@cbc.ca or leave a comment on TikTok. And our first caller is Ivan at Gabriola Island. Hi, Ivan. Welcome. What do you think of EVs? Are you still interested?
Yes, hello. Yes, we certainly are. In fact, a couple of weeks ago, we purchased an EV simply because we felt it was the right thing to do, given the negative effects of the use of fossil fuel and other factors. I won't go into details. But we're being on a Gulf island. We're in a unique situation in that BC Ferries recently introduced a policy or announced a policy saying that EVs were, if damaged or in need of a tow, would not be allowed on a BC ferry, unlike internal combustion vehicles, which can come and go. Now, the way that was framed, that communication, sent a lot of misinformation out there. And mind you, my information is anecdotal, but when I speak to people who live away from the Gulf Islands, my relatives, friends in Vancouver, the message by the time it got to them was, oh, why should I get an EV? They won't let me on the ferries. The ferries clearly don't want EVs, which isn't necessarily the case, but I can see how that message could be put out there. The negative thing, it's saying that somehow EVs are problematic, more so than internal combustion vehicle, that there's somehow a danger to either public health or safety if you put them on a ferry. And instead of BC Ferries saying we're looking at ways to deal with this, what we get is this message that don't get an EV for now if you live on a Gulf island. Now, clearly, we're not a large population here, 4,500 people on this Gulf island, but in terms of local pollution, it's a significant, fossil fuel is a significant contributor. So anything that puts up a barrier, a challenge to adopting EVs is moving the wrong way, I believe, and that public institutions, particularly utilities such as BC Ferries, should be on board.
A really interesting call, Ivan. Thank you very much. And sounds like something we can perhaps follow up with BC Ferries on that. Randy is our next caller in Chilliwack now. And what do you think of support or interest for electric vehicles in BC, Randy?
Well, my idea, and I'll tell you the truth, I owned an ID4, and another friend of mine did. We bought them at the time when we got the rebate of $9,000. Now, when I found out later on during the wintertime, the rate of the battery is so bad that you couldn't go very far. You had for a charge, and I have a charger in my home. But the point is, it didn't pay for itself. And when I went to trade it in, the depreciation is it's killing that industry. You will, unless that changes, nobody's going to want to buy an EV in the future, because when you go to trade in, you'll get nothing for it. It's terrible. But and also the fact that the EV, the batteries don't last as long, and it's been commonplace that you think how many years the battery is going to go, and it costs so much money. When I heard about some people paying over $20,000 for a battery or more than that on cars, what's the use of having it? In the long run, you end up pay more money. Now, which is what I do think you should have. I believe in the plug-in. I did have a plug-in, and I would still have another one. The plug-in, and I got the other type right now, and it's very good. And I'm telling you right now, it's very important. That I don't believe this mandate, whatever can happen, is never going to work on, and even infrastructure is not strong enough. I drove that car, and I had to wait for hours to plug in at a place. And why do you want to do that? So unless you stay at home, you don't drive far, and you don't mind, fine. But if you want to go any further than a certain distance, be prepared. You're going to be in trouble. And it's an anxiety thing, too.
Randy, thank you so much. Good to hear from you and your experience as well. Evan, let's talk about the mandates themselves. So they start next year. 26% of sales are to be of light-duty vehicles, and some classes of pickup trucks and vans are slated to be zero emission, and then that goes up to 90% by 2030, and the goal is 100% by 2035. Is that feasible now?
Yeah. So taking them each in turn, and this comes back to this idea that at this moment in time, we are needing to weather a bit of a storm. And we've absolutely been advocating to the government that this moment requires a bit of a pivot on how we're approaching the mandates. But what we need to do is a regroup, not a retreat. So when we look at the targets themselves, 2026 and trying to achieve 26%, we were 23% last year, and the entire policy has been designed with a lot of flexibilities. So we actually can achieve 26% relatively easily here. When we look at 2030, that goal of 90%, that may have made sense when it was first set and we had a US as a strong proponent of putting vehicles on the road. That's significantly changed now. We do need to take another look at what actually makes sense under current market conditions. We can look to places like California that have set somewhere around 68% by 2030, the federal government target of 60%, recalibrating those targets to be pragmatic and in line with where we can, still driving ambition, still driving affordable EVs into the BC market so that consumers have that choice, but calibrated to where we're going. And when it comes to the longer term target of 100%, we've advocated for dropping that to 95%, dropping that, to accommodate the exceptions that are going to take place where an EV isn't going to be that perfect fit option, and for households that ultimately want to stick with a gas vehicle in that time frame. At the end of the day, if we were seeing 95% of sales able to be affordable EVs for households, that would be an incredible change.
How concerned are you about the impact that's going to have on trying to ease greenhouse gas emissions? Any kind of deviation from that plan right now?
Yeah, at the end of the day, targets aren't going to get us emission reductions. The adoption of clean technologies, the actual reduction in use of fossil fuels will. So setting an ambitious target that can't be achieved isn't going to do anything else. Concrete targets that actually help drive, that send market signals that are ambitious but achievable will make a difference, and then these things will start to snowball. A target of 60% in 2030 is a meaningful step towards achieving, what is one of BC's largest sectors of emissions, which is transportation.
Setting targets that are that can't be achieved. That's really interesting, and an interesting, as you say, an interesting point that we're at right now when it comes to this goal. Thank you so much for joining us. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, happy to be here.
Evan Pivnick is the program manager at Clean Energy Canada. And yes, BC is about to start its path toward legislating all new vehicle sales to be zero-emission vehicles. And that starts ramping up next year. Again, in 2026, 26% of sales of new light-duty and some pickup trucks and vans will have to be zero-emission. That goes up to 2030 to 90% in 2030, and then 100% in 2035. And as you heard from our previous guest, it may be time to ease at least the 2030 goal. So we're asking you, are you still interested in an electric vehicle? And what do you think of the new zero-emission vehicle sales mandates coming to BC? Our numbers are 1-800-825-5950, 604-669-3733, or you can hit pound 690. Love to hear from you on TikTok as well. And Coffee writes, I don't want an EV. Storm writes, I love my EV. Okay, thank you very much for those comments. Livebox Break writes, BC needs more charging stations. And Nicholas Daniels writes, older vehicles are built better. Okay, lots of comments there. Right now, let's hear from the folks behind the new poll. It was commissioned by the Energy Futures Institute, conducted by Ipsos. And it found that 56% of British Columbians oppose the sales mandates, while 34% support them. That gap has grown since last year. And joining me now is the chair of the Energy Futures Institute, Barry Penner. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you and your listeners and viewers.
Thanks for joining us. Why do you think there is less support, according to your poll or your commission poll, for these sales mandates?
What Ipsos found is that the number one barrier to purchasing an electric vehicle is price. They typically do cost $8,000 to $10,000 more, or maybe even more than that, compared to a non-electric vehicle. And we all know we're in a cost of living crisis already, and people are having to make difficult choices, and being asked to fork out additional funds up front is challenging for many Canadians and British Columbians. That's the primary barrier to adoption. I heard one of your callers mention the decreasing range and the anxiety that person feels as the battery didn't perform as well in the winter. I'll just point out, not all electric vehicles are manufactured equally or created equally. Some do perform better than others, so it's really up to consumers to do the research prior to making a purchase. And the technology is improving all the time. But it is true that when the weather is colder, the batteries don't get you as far. That's somewhat true as well for an internal combustion engine. They don't operate as efficiently in cold weather, but you see an even greater decrease in electric range than you do in gas mileage range for the more traditional vehicles. So that's the number one barrier, but there are other things that Ipsos found in British Columbia. People are worried about the lack of public infrastructure for charging, and the intensity of that concern grows outside of the Lower Mainland, as does the concern about range. So the number one concern is cost. Number two is, where am I going to charge it? And number three, how far can I go? And those concerns are much greater outside the Lower Mainland. And so a one-size-fits-all approach, which is what we have here currently, isn't going over well with the public. And overall, the public is opposed to these mandates, and that opposition is growing. We did a similar poll last year, and the gap between those who support the mandates and those who oppose them has grown by 7 points, with the majority being opposed and only a minority supporting them. I think 34% this year supporting the mandates. A majority, 56%, say get rid of them. And that gap has grown by 7 points in 1 year.
Mm-hmm. What do you think should happen with the mandates? What do you think should happen with that?
We asked people through Ipsos, should the mandates be changed? And 76% of British Columbians said yes. So more than 3/4 say change the mandates. And one of the changes we asked about was, how about allowing regular hybrids to count towards the mandates? Because currently the government does not acknowledge traditional hybrid vehicles that you don't have to plug in.
Right.
They're not considered acceptable. But 75% of British Columbians say that they should be. They should be counted towards the mandates. Quebec recently made this shift about a month ago, and they are now giving partial credit to traditional hybrid vehicles, in part because they're made in Canada. There are no electric passenger vehicles made in Canada. So ironically, our British Columbia and Canadian policy is discouraging Canadians from buying made in Canada vehicles like the Toyota RAV4 hybrid, like the Honda Civic hybrid, like the Honda CR-V compact SUV hybrid. Those are all made in Canada, and many are exported to the US. But under these mandates, they don't get credit, and they actually could attract a $20,000 penalty per vehicle if they exceed the allowed number of non-electric vehicles. And I
Okay.
just want to clarify one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
These mandates are not coming. They're here. The 26 model year are arriving on the dealers' lots now. And so this 26% sales requirement in BC, and it's 20% across the country, but 26% in BC, that's applying to the vehicles that are arriving now.
So they're dealing with it
And
now.
our sales have dropped to 13%. 13% of new vehicle sales in June in British Columbia were electric. So we're about half of what we're supposed to be at under these mandates. So they will not be attained. I heard your previous commenter saying, "Oh, we can hit the 26 targets." We're currently at 13% sales. We're
He said
50% off.
23% last year.
We peaked in one quarter at just about 24%, and since then they've been plummeting. And this year they continue to slide. And for May and June, in May it was 13.6%, and in June they were at 13.2.
Okay.
Those are according to Statistics Canada data released last week.
Barry,
That's
I'm
the
just going to
most current
pause here
data
as we are.
available.
Pardon me, I'm sorry to jump in. I'm just going to pause here. We are about to head into a TV break, but we are going to continue our conversation in with regard to electric vehicle sales and mandates.
Great.
My guest is Barry Penner, who's chair of the Energy Futures Institute. And so we know that with these this mandate, as you say, it's already having an effect. There's supposed to be technical reviews as we go along, right? Because this was put in place really in 2019. What's been the response from the province? We did reach out today to ask to see whether there is any view to changing anything here. But what have you heard, or what are you hearing from the province when it comes to pushing forward with this policy?
That we obtained government documents in late June, where an assistant deputy minister acknowledged that hitting these targets will be challenging. That's in quotation marks, and that's bureaucrat speak for very difficult or impossible. So they internally know that they have a problem, and they point to declining sales. Their stats were a bit more dated. They said we're at about 15% electric vehicle sales in BC. That was from, I think, March. Since then, sales have declined further because the BC government canceled the provincial rebates, which were up to $4,000, depending on your income and the type of vehicle you were buying. And I think one of your callers referenced the federal rebates also went away. They did in January.
Mm-hmm.
They ran out of money, and people could get up to $5,000 there. So if you met the income qualifications, BC-wise and federally for the type of vehicle, you could get up to $9,000 off. That money's off the table. And so it's not surprising, given a cost of living crisis and people saying their number one barrier to buying an EV is the cost, that the EV sales have plummeted. But both governments have said they're looking at it. There's a possibility some form of a rebate may come back, but at this point, that is uncertain. But, you know, we heard the announcement today about some more funding for public infrastructure. And yes, we certainly don't have enough of that. BC is in a better position than some other provinces, let's say Alberta. I was there last week with some people trying to charge their electric vehicle. And it really was disruptive to a summer vacation, trying to find adequate public charging when you're going camping and trying to tow a trailer. It was quite impractical. But in BC, we're in a better position, but we still have a long ways to go. This announcement today from the federal government is supposed to help pay for 480 public charging stations,
Mm-hmm.
which is good, but it represents less than 1.5% of the number of chargers we're going to need by 2030. We currently have about 7,500 or so public charging stations in BC. According to a report that we commissioned,
Okay.
we're going to need about 40,000 by 2030, when we're currently at 7,500.
Okay.
So we have a big gap to bridge, about 33,000 more to go. And this announcement today might get us another 480.
Barry Penner, it's very good to speak with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Appreciate you having us.
Barry Penner is chair of the Energy Futures Institute, and we are taking your calls on this. We're going to go to our callers coming up, a lot of them lined up right now, as we ask you, are you still interested in an electric vehicle? And what do you think of the incoming BC zero-emission vehicle sales mandate starting next year? We'll go back to your calls coming up in our next half hour. Right now, it is 12:31, time for a CBC News update, and here is Amelia John.
Good afternoon. A man has died after being found unconscious at the Prince Rupert Summer Carnival last night. Police say they responded to a report of an injured man at the event. He was found near one of the rides and was later pronounced dead. RCMP, WorkSafe BC, and the Coroner's Service are investigating. Vancouver International Airport says things are getting back to normal today after staffing issues at Canada's air navigation provider disrupted travel yesterday. The airport reported significant delays and cancellations due to staffing constraints at Nav Canada. And daily heat records continue to tumble across BC, with 29 communities setting new highs yesterday. They include Lytton, which matched Monday's high of 41.3 degrees, making it the hottest temperature recorded across Canada so far this year. Heat warnings remain in effect for the Fraser Canyon, the South Thompson region, and inland sections of the north and central coasts, while Metro Vancouver has issued a smog warning for the Fraser Valley. For a closer look now at the weather forecast along the north coast today, clearing this afternoon, high of 18 degrees. In the Peace, sunny skies, highs to 31. For the central interior, sunshine with a high of 30. For the southeast corner of the province, mix of sun and cloud, highs up to 33 degrees. For the southern interior, increasing clouds, some wind gusts, highs to 33. And along the south coast, mix of sun and cloud, hazy in some parts, highs to 28. And that is the CBC News from Vancouver.
Thank you very much, Amelia.
Thanks, Michelle.
That's Amelia John in the CBC Vancouver newsroom. Welcome back. You are with BC Today. I'm Michelle Elliott, and thanks so much for joining us this afternoon. We are taking your calls, asking you if you are still interested in an electric vehicle. A new poll has found that the support for the incoming mandates for sales of zero-emission vehicles it appears to be waning. This is a poll that was commissioned by the Energy Futures Institute and conducted by Ipsos. So we're asking you these questions on the open line. Lots of comments right now. Tanya on the line in Vanderhoof. Hello, Tanya. What are your thoughts on electric vehicles?
Hi there. I just wanted to come clean with the fact that I was never interested in the electric vehicles mandate. I'm not changing my mind, as it were. If the electric vehicle mandate was a question when it was a possibility of them being brought to British Columbia via electric vehicles, that would be a different scenario for me. As far as I'm educated, I believe that we are still using fossil fuels to get them here on barges, not electric power.
Okay, I see where you're going. Okay.
Yeah, so that's a bit of a concern, not to mention, I think that maybe the polled public isn't entirely aware of what goes into mining in order to get all the things to make the electric vehicles. So I get it. It's not in our backyard. It's not in BC. We're not wrecking this particular part of the earth, but we are still wrecking the earth. And I have a house in Surrey, BC, and I also have a house in Vanderhoof. I live primarily in Surrey, about 60% of the time, and the other 40% is Vanderhoof. So I do commute back and forth. It's about 1,000 kilometers from one house to the other, and I don't see it being cost-effective to use an electric vehicle if I have to stop. My time has value. And Barry was speaking about family vacations in the summer, that it is a bit of a hindrance that you have to stop and charge your vehicle. I get that, but if you only have 10 hours of driving, say you're leaving Vanderhoof in the winter, when you only have 10 hours of daylight, it makes it really difficult if you have to stop and charge your vehicle. Not to mention, they don't really start at minus 45. I've had neighbors who had electric vehicles, and at minus 45, they don't start at all. So it's not a question of the batteries not lasting long or draining more quickly. They just don't work. And I wanted to know if there was any compensation for people who don't live in the mainland. I mean, I understand that 90% of our population is very close to the U.S. border, but our climate is also different closer to the border.
Right.
We don't have minus 45 in Vancouver, but we do in Vanderhoof and Prince Rupert and Prince George and McBride and everywhere else.
Tanya, and you're right. It is, as we heard, right, Barry Penner's point was that it's not a one-size-fit-all, and certainly the geographic differences are a factor there. And so for you, this is not something that would work in your life, and so the mandate would not be a good thing. Thank you so much for your call from Vanderhoof. Rob is our next caller now from Prince George. Hi, Rob.
Hi. I'm actually on a road trip right now, just pulled over at a rest area. We're going from Vancouver and actually heading to very near Vanderhoof, ironically, based on the last call. We've done this trip now the last few years. We've gone as far as north as the Kispiox Valley in an EV. And these are family road trips. I find it works very well. We do have to stop and charge, but usually we also have to stop and eat or get snacks or the restroom. So really, it doesn't really change much as far as the time for us. I find there are so many misconceptions out there, and we've heard so many of those misconceptions today on this call-in program.
We did hear from Barry, who said, it does depend on what you are driving. Like, the different vehicles, even internal combustion vehicles, will perform differently given the weather. So people are probably wondering what it is that you're driving, Rob.
So I'm actually driving a moto vehicle, so it's very economical. This is a car-sharing service, and it's a Kia Niro that I'm driving, so it's not an expensive EV at all, but it seems to work very well for us.
Okay.
The infrastructure gets better every year, but I think we had to wait like 2 minutes for a charging station on this trip. So I haven't experienced those long waits that other people have talked about. Like I said, the infrastructure is getting better every year. We also have done trips to the interior in the winter, and you do have to charge a little bit more frequently, but the difference I haven't found to be that significant. And it certainly, again, is doable, even going, over the Coquihalla when it's winter and there's, storms happening. It's definitely doable.
Okay. So what do you think of the mandates then?
I support the mandates. Again, I think the biggest problem we're facing is misinformation. I mean, even the comment about passenger vehicles not being made in Canada. I believe Dodge just introduced a Charger EV that's coming off of a factory in Ontario. The pricing for replacing batteries, again, those are based on sort of these urban legends where people are being overcharged by dealers. Some people are replacing batteries for as little as $5,000. We have vehicles now that are being sold for under $30,000. Nissan just announced that. So, I support the mandates. There might be better ways to do it. I would like to see us remove subsidies for the fossil fuels so that we would see the price of gas and oil, the true price reflected. And that would, help people realize that EVs are actually more economical in the long term. I know the upfront cost is higher, but when you can fill your battery for $9, if you're charging at home, it's definitely the operating costs and the maintenance costs are lower.
Rob, great to hear from you. Have a good trip, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Our next caller is Rob in Chilliwack. Hi, Rob.
Hi, good afternoon.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. I've never been a supporter of the NDP and their EV mandate. I think people should have the freedom of choice. And just so everyone realizes this, in the NDP's mandate, under the NDP's quota, if a car dealership goes over their quota of selling combustion engine vehicle, there will be a $20,000 levy fine on that dealership for going over and above. I think that is actually, they will put dealerships out of business. I think it's crazy. I think people should have the freedom of choice. And I've heard many callers now saying, the batteries, and people need to look at actually what is happening to the world. We are creating another race for metals, minerals to create these batteries. Look at what's happening at the Southern Point in South America with the way they refine and extract lithium. They are destroying the citizens there, their rivers and waterways. Look what's happening in the Congo. Little kids, 8, 9, 10 years old, going down into these mines. So we in the West like to put our blinders on and we go, oh, look at me, I'm so green. Do people even realize I believe it was last year, we imported the most energy ever from the United States. You know where that comes from? It comes from coal-fired power plants. Yes, folks, that's true. You can look it up. So I think people should have the freedom of choice. We don't have the infrastructure, by the way, to even our grid cannot handle the amount of electrification that NDP, David Eby and his NDP want to enforce on people. They're going with wind and solar is their new mantra. That will not cut the mustard in terms of supplying the electrification what we need, and with the amount of people coming here too. I'm not a big supporter of the EV mandates. I think it's ridiculous. Thank you very much. I really appreciate.
Thanks so much thank you for the call, Rob. That's Rob in Chilliwack, and our next caller is Maya in White Rock. Hi, Maya.
Hi, how are you?
I am fine, thanks. And what are your thoughts on electric vehicles?
We're actually on the fence. We're a dual family. We're American and Canadian. And we have one EV now, and we purchased a high-priced EV so we would have the range to go places. And the fact that there's so many charging stations in BC was one of the reasons, because it's easy access when you're right across the border. We're White Rock and basically Blaine. And it turns out that it's very hard in the metro area to get charging without waiting for too long. And in the States, there's a lot of waiting. So looking forward to it, to having more stations along the way to visit family up north, to visit family out on the island. But there's just kind of a fine line and knowing how much of that is going to be accessible for us. And if we should purchase a new vehicle, we bought a vehicle that was made in North America with Canadian parts and American parts manufactured here, nothing from overseas. But, you know, if we're going to buy a truck, you're not getting any rebates up north or down south now. So our first car was American. Our second one we were hoping to buy up in Canada and, you know, get us like a light-duty truck to replace our gas power. And now we're kind of in between with not knowing how quickly it's all going to move forward. There are new stations, but some of them don't work. And it just depends on the day, it seems like. And the temperature does make a difference, but not as much as we thought with the car. But we got a long-range vehicle. The shorter range vehicles, I'm sure, would be a difficult issue. But we're kind of watching it closely, and to see, you know, $23 million go in a certain direction, you want to see the end result being that we have an easier access to family and business and going back and forth. So, and honestly, I'd rather use the stations in Canada than down in the States, you know. But we're both dual, and it's kind of funny to look at. People look at us funny with the American plate car and be like, why are you up here charging? So, yeah.
Watching things closely. Great to hear your view as a consumer, Maya. Thank you. Kevin is our last caller on this in North Vancouver. Hi, Kevin. Your thoughts on electric vehicles and the incoming mandates?
Hi, Michelle. How are you?
I am just fine. Good to have you. What are your thoughts?
Thanks very much for having me. I am a proponent of trying anything that's going to work better than what we've been doing for the last couple of 100 years. Stephen Hawking in June of 2016 said that due to greed and stupidity, humankind has 100, maybe 200 years to go. Since the Industrial Revolution, which began in earnest in 1830, we've done more damage to the planet than in the previous 2 million years of human or pseudo-human existence. 97.1% of the scientists in the world think that global warming is human-caused and that it is causing a lot of problems. And even if the 2.9% that don't think that are right, what reason do we have not to err on the side of caution? You know, David Suzuki once said that it's not inconceivable that the planet could become uninhabitable for mammals. And when you get people calling in and talking about freedom of choice and things like that, it's freedom of choice at what cost? You know, Norway has done really well with putting their program into place for EVs. And one thing that I think everybody should ask themselves is what sacrifices are we as individuals willing to make to ensure that future generations of descendants we have never met and we never will meet have as good an opportunity for a wonderful life as we've had. We have to do something different than what we've been doing. Thanks. I'll listen to your comments.
Great to hear from you, Kevin. Kevin in North Vancouver. That is, in fact, it for our calls. Thanks so much for all of your calls on this topic. You can keep emailing us, bctoday@cbc.ca. Lots of comments coming in on TikTok as well. We have a comment from the Nanusian who writes, not to mention all family-sized EVs are over 75,000, which puts it into luxury taxed vehicles. And Coffee, who had commented before about no EVs, writes, no one wants an EV unless you live in a city. Talk to rural Canadians and see what they think about it. Empire, though, writes, interestingly, I live in Vanderhoof, too, and own an electric vehicle. So far, so good. Miller's mom wrote, make EV vehicle prices so competitive that the consumer chooses this option on their own. Lots of comments coming in on email as well. Maureen writes from Oliver, I fully agree with the caller who says EVs are not the answer. We are creating an entirely new industry based on fossil fuels. Building a road to access a lithium in Northern Ontario is the first step in the destruction that will be caused. I am not sure what the answer is, but it is not EVs. Cheryl writes, I've owned an EV since 2017, a 2014 Fiat 500e. 8 years ago, then bought a Polestar in January this year. I travel back and forth from Vancouver to the Sunshine Coast for work, and my shorter range Fiat was awesome. Now I have a much better battery and luxurious with dual motors, etc., and have had a trip to Edmonton and back easily this summer. EVs are the future. Cheryl, thank you as well. Lots of comments coming in. BC Today at cbc.ca. You can certainly keep them coming, and we'll continue to cover this story as well. And I have reached out to the province on a statement with regard to the mandates. So we'll be bringing that to you when we get it. $12:47 now. You're with BC Today. Well, next week is the start of the new school year, and ahead of that, BC is urging parents to protect their kids from measles, mumps, rubella, polio, whooping cough, and chickenpox. And we have an immunologist from the BC Centre for Disease Control now joining us to talk about what we need to know about immunizations ahead of the school year. And Dr. Jia Hu is an immunologist at the BC Centre for Disease Control. Good afternoon. Thanks for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
Why is now a good time to talk about this and revisit immunizations for our kids?
Yeah, well, certainly, as summer draws to an end and kids go back to school, they'll be exposed to sort of more kids, that they'll be in close proximity in school setting. And so it's always a good time to remind people about the importance of back to school immunizations, particularly as cases of measles, as you know, have been rising across British Columbia and Canada. But of course, we recommend routine vaccines for a bunch of other diseases beyond measles, like some of the ones that you mentioned.
And what are the ages that we should be looking at then when we're talking about, okay, get your immunizations up to date?
Yeah, so we recommend different immunizations at different ages. There's some you get in infancy, some you get just before school entry. For example, the measles-containing vaccine, we recommend one dose at 12 months of age and one dose between 4 and 6 years of age. And then there's vaccines people get in schools. So within schools, they'll get, HPV vaccines, meningitis vaccines. Those are in grade 6 and grade 9. But, as kids sort of re-enter school, it's good to sort of check what vaccines sort of they're recommended to get and which they've already gotten, and then based on that, get caught up if people are missing any vaccines.
And can you take us through what the concerns are? What are the impacts of these illnesses?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly depends on the illness in question because they're all very, very different. But if I use measles as an example, we've had more than 230 cases so far in BC this year, and Canada's had many thousands of cases. I think people may think that measles is a benign childhood illness because maybe if you're a bit older, likely you had it. But 7% of our cases have been hospitalized, actually, right? And that's a really, really high number. You almost a 1 in 10 chance of being in hospital, which I don't think any parent wants to their kid to have to experience. With measles, there's also things like pneumonia, swelling of the brain, and not in BC yet, but in Ontario, a child passed away of measles this year and also last year, and so you can even die of these conditions.
Yeah, certainly. When you talk about whooping cough as well, we've had some cases in the past years in BC. So what are the concerns there?
Yeah, so whooping cough, is really, really worrisome in really young infants. Again, can cause hospitalization and death as well. And certainly, we have seen an increase in whooping cough cases this year, and so it's particularly of concern in really, really young infants. But of course, the way to protect really young infants in the household is to ensure that people in the household, like older siblings, are immunized, which is why it's important for everybody to ensure that they're sort of up to date with their routine immunizations.
How can they do that? How can they check on their child's immunization status?
Yeah, so the best way to actually check your child's immunization status is to go to Health Gateway, and that's an online portal where you can see all the vaccines that you've received. Alternatively, you can sort of talk to the person that gave your child the vaccines. It might have been a family doctor, it might have been at a public health clinic, and they should have some records. And of course, HealthLink BC is a good place to just see the immunization schedule, which sort of tells what vaccines you should get at what age. But Health Gateway is probably the first place I'd go, particularly as our records are pretty good for kids in BC.
And Dr. Hu, what about COVID, which is still around? And so we have seen a start of a rise according to Health Canada. And so as kids go back into those classroom environments, what are the concerns with regard to COVID?
Yeah, so we have seen a small rise in sort of COVID test positivity. That's the proportion of tests that, are positive for the COVID virus in the past few weeks. I'd say that COVID levels are still at fairly low to moderate levels, and severe outcomes like hospitalizations linked to COVID remain quite low, and so I wouldn't raise the alarm bells too high about COVID quite yet. That being said, for COVID, as with a lot of the other diseases that we talked about, a vaccine is available. We generally recommend the vaccine for people at really higher risk of severe complications of COVID, for example, older adults or younger people, including kids with certain medical conditions or immunocompromising conditions. The new COVID formulation vaccines have just been approved by Health Canada very recently, and they'll be available later in the fall in October. And so, of course, in BC this year, we'll make the vaccine available for everybody. But again, we're really recommending it strongly for people at higher risk, like older adults and younger people with, chronic medical conditions.
And when it comes to that, it's interesting. So many families are very busy, right? And transportation can be an issue. So what can be done to make these vaccines more accessible?
Yeah, so I think one thing we do really, really well in British Columbia compared to a lot of other provinces is that pharmacies actually have access to a lot of publicly funded vaccines, and they can immunize anybody 4 years and older. They can't do sort of the 2-month-olds or the 4-month-olds, but I think that one good place to get vaccines is pharmacies. They're kind of everywhere, and a lot of them have these vaccines. Your point around transportation and logistics is a good one. Certainly in preparation for return to school, public health will be, generally hosting more clinics. They'll make sure the vaccine is available, and so hopefully it'll be a little bit easier for parents to book in their visits. I think another part of this is actually just, being aware of the vaccines and what vaccines are needed, which links back to what we were talking about earlier about visiting HealthLink to know the vaccines are recommended, and Health Gateway to check the vaccines that your child has already received.
When it comes to awareness, what about vaccine hesitancy? A recent poll from Angus Reid found 1 in 5 Canadians with children under 18 are hesitant to vaccinate their children. We have dealt with that, right, over the pandemic, the COVID pandemic as well. So how do you speak to parents who feel hesitant about vaccination?
Yeah, it's a really, really good question, and certainly we are seeing more concerns about vaccines emerging in BC, across Canada, all over the world. I'd say that most parents still generally believe in the value of vaccines. People may have questions. I think having questions is very normal and very natural. I'd say for the routine childhood vaccines that we give, like the measles vaccine or the whooping cough vaccine, these vaccines, they have been available for many, many decades. They've been given to literally billions of children all over the world, and they've been given in BC for decades as well. And we know that based on the fact that they've been given to literally billions of children, they have a pretty good track record of being safe. We know they're very safe, and we also know they're really effective. And so I think half of that is just around understanding the vaccines are safe and effective, and I think the other half is just recognizing that a lot of these conditions we're trying to protect against are pretty serious, right? HPV is another vaccine, one that is offered in schools school, human papillomavirus, it causes many types of cancers that still lead to, more than 1,000 deaths in Canada any given year. And so I think parents should also know that, we aren't just recommending these things because we think they're nice to have, but they're protecting your kids against some pretty serious stuff.
Beyond vaccination, what are some general safety practices as parents get their kids ready for going back to school? What can they be thinking about just to keep them healthy and protected from illness?
Yeah, I mean, and I know it's a really, really busy time for parents, and we're sort of barraging them with all this information. But I would say that generally practicing good respiratory hygiene and etiquette. A really important thing is that, if folks are sick, they should stay at home because, that really limits the spread to, other people, ensuring that, people wash their hands as much as possible or as much as they can. All those things will sort of help kids stay safe and healthy and keep other kids safe and healthy as we sort of restart the school year.
What's it like for you? You're interim medical director of immunization programs at the BC CDC. What's this time of year like for you?
Well, it's been a pretty busy time of year actually, because this summer, of course, there's the whole back to school thing. We've been having quite a few measles cases in BC, as I think people are aware of. But we've also sort of made a few changes to our immunization programs, right? We sort of expanded eligibility for HPV, so everybody up to the age of 26 could get it, which is really, really good. We changed around some of our vaccines for pneumococcal pneumonia, and it's basically a better vaccine we're offering both kids and adults. And so between some of these program changes, which I think are really, really good for, one, ensuring people have the best vaccines available, and two, expanding the number of people who get the vaccines, we're in a really good place. But, to your point around vaccine hesitancy, at the end of the day, it's up to the parents to immunize their children and themselves. And so I hope that going back to school is a good reminder for them to do so.
Really good to speak with you. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
Dr. Jia Hu is an immunologist and interim medical director of immunization programs and vaccine preventable diseases for the BC Centre for Disease Control. That is it for our show. Thanks to all of you for joining our discussion. And again, our email, bctoday@cbc.ca.